Now to a major legal setback for former President Trump. A federal appeals court has blocked a court-appointed special master from reviewing documents taken from his home. More on this, let's bring in CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga. Nicole, what does this ruling mean for the government's investigation into Mr. Trump's handling of classified documents?
Well, Vlad, Anne-Marie, for weeks we talked about this special master, this independent arbiter who was assigned to essentially review thousands of documents seized by the FBI from the former president's Mar-a-Lago home. Now, this ruling puts the brakes on that. And what's more, it paves the way for the Department of Justice to access these documents for nearly 3 months. Investigators were in a partial holding pattern here, unable to pore over most of these sensitive documents seized by FBI as they were being reviewed by Special Master Raymond Dearie. As a reminder to our viewers, this is part of the Department of Justice's ongoing probe, trying to determine if there has been potential obstruction of justice, criminal mishandling of government records, or violations of the Espionage Act here. The 11th Circuit had previously restored U.S. government access to about 100 of these classified documents, but now it's all systems go for the rest of them. And if you look at this ruling, it is 21 pages. On the 20th page, this is what the three-judge panel, all GOP appointees, writes, quote, "The law is clear. We cannot write a rule that allows any subject of a search warrant to block government investigations after the execution of the warrant, nor can we write a rule that allows only former presidents to do so, making it clear that there are no exceptions in the law here."
Interesting. So have we heard from the former president?
Well, a spokesperson for the former president, Stephen Chung, said that the panel's decision was purely jurisdictional, based on procedure, in a statement arguing again that Team Trump feels the authorized search of the former president's home was unprecedented, illegal, and unwarranted, notably not saying in this statement, Anne-Marie, whether or not they'll actually appeal the decision. So the ball is firmly in Team Trump's court, whether or not they will ask the 11th Circuit here, Court of Appeals, to rehear the case before the full panel, or whether or not they will appeal to the Supreme Court. One last thing, notably in their ruling, the panel here essentially mandating its order for a week, allowing 7 days for Team Trump to figure out how it wants to move forward.
The House Select Committee of January 6th, Nicole, as you know, is expected to meet to discuss potential recommendations of criminal charges to the DOJ. What do we know about their deliberations?
Yeah, well, possible recommendations about whether or not to move forward with criminal charges, for the former president or perhaps any of his aides, many of whom have come before the committee in recent months. This decision will come from a subcommittee of the House Select Committee on January 6th, the group of lawyers, actually, Representatives Jamie Raskin, Adam Schiff, Zoe Lofgren, and Liz Cheney. Earlier this week, Representative Raskin telling reporters that the committee is really focused on making sure that nothing falls in between the cracks here. We know that it's not unprecedented for the committee to make recommendations to the Department of Justice. For instance, this committee has already recommended Justice Department pursue criminal charges for contempt of Congress against 4 people, Trump aides who did not abide by committee subpoenas: Steve Bannon, political advisor to the former president, Peter Navarro, Mark Meadow, of course, the former chief of staff, and Dan Scavino. Now, the committee is drafting its final report now. Its mandate is over on December 31st, and lawmakers say that they are hoping to push this report out before Christmas.
The DOJ reached out to former Vice President Mike Pence in their ongoing investigation into the events surrounding the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Yesterday on Red and Blue, his former chief of staff, Mark Short, talked about the possibility of whether or not, Pence would be speaking to prosecutors. I want to play some of that sound.
I think that there are really profound questions about speech and debate clause here. But I also think that the reality is that the vice president understands that there's a difference between a January 6th congressional investigation where, he felt very strongly about a separation of power and that there was not the same sort of, that having served in Congress for 12 years, he knew what the role of Congress was, and sort of investigations that don't have criminal aspects to them are different than a DOJ investigation.
Okay, he's not really clear there, but it appears as if he's sort of suggesting that, Mike Pence is not going to speak to them voluntarily.
Yeah, it seems to be a little political speak here, suggesting, right, an openness to, complying with the Department of Justice. And an interesting distinction that Mark Short is making, of course, Short, a longtime aide to former Vice President Trump, between the Department of Justice's investigation and, of course, the January 6th committee's inquiry, when former Vice President Pence closed the door on meeting with the committee. He told our own Margaret Brennan that he was really disappointed by the House Select Committee, that he felt it was partisan in nature, clearly not making that argument here in the case of the Department of Justice. We should note that if the Justice Department was to question, Pence in terms of its criminal investigation into Mr. Trump's potential efforts to stay in power following the 2020 presidential election, that would be hugely significant. Clearly the former vice president at the White House and present for a number of meetings leading up to the January 6th Capitol insurrection, discussions of perhaps blocking Congress's certification of the election results. Another question here, though, if this does happen, does the former president try to invoke executive privilege to stop or limit the testimony of former Vice President Pence? All of that remains to be seen.
All right, Nicole, thank you very much.
Thank you.